I stood frozen in front of apartment 4B, my hands full of heavy plastic grocery bags, staring at the bright neon orange paper taped ruthlessly over the deadbolt. Eviction notice. The words blurred before my eyes as a familiar, suffocating panic flared up in my chest. My mind raced, trying to calculate the numbers in my head for the 100th time this week. I had paid the rent. I had sacrificed my sleep, my weekends, and my sanity to make sure that money was transferred on the 1st of the month, every single month. As an expat living in one of the most expensive districts in Seoul, I already worked 2 brutal jobs just to keep my head above water. By day, I translated legal documents at a mid-tier firm, my eyes straining against computer screens for 8 hours. By night, I ran social media marketing for a local cosmetics brand until my fingers cramped over my keyboard at 3 a.m. I did it all because I had to. After my mother passed away back home, leaving behind a mountain of funeral expenses and unsecured debts, I promised myself I would never let anyone see me fail. I would never let this city crush me. My rich, radiant brown skin and my crown of natural curls already made me a constant target for sideways glances on the subway and hushed whispers in the office. "She doesn't really fit the company culture," I'd overheard a manager say. I was constantly working twice as hard just to be treated as half as good. I was exhausted, carrying a mountain of grief and financial burden, feeling completely invisible to the world around me. But I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Minho, my boyfriend of 2 years. Minho was an aspiring music producer who promised me the world but delivered nothing but excuses. For the past year, he had been in between gigs, which was just a polite way of saying he spent his days sleeping on my faded velvet sofa, smoking on the balcony, and waiting for his big break while I paid for his food, his studio equipment, and his half of the rent. Whenever I gently brought up our mounting bills, he would turn it around on me, making me feel like a monster. "You're so materialistic, Maya," he'd sigh, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand artistic pressure. I thought you supported my dreams. I guess I'm just never enough for you." Because I desperately wanted a family, because I didn't want to admit I was entirely alone in this foreign country, I swallowed the guilt. I let him make me feel like I was the problem. I worked harder, slept less, and carried him on my bruised back, convincing myself that our struggle was just a test of true love. Now, staring at the eviction notice, the grocery bag slipped from my fingers, a carton of eggs cracking against the worn linoleum floor. The door suddenly swung open, and Minho stood there, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt I had bought him, his face flushed with anger. He didn't look at the spilled groceries. He didn't ask how my day at the firm was. He just grabbed the orange paper and shoved it into my face. "What is the meaning of this, Maya?" he yelled, his voice echoing down the narrow hallway. "They're throwing us out. The property manager just came by with 2 security guards and said we have 48 hours to pack our things. Did you skip the rent payment? Where did the money go? I have a major label meeting next week, and now I'm being humiliated because you couldn't handle the bills." The unfairness of his words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air right out of my lungs. "I paid it, Minho," I cried out, my voice cracking as tears of pure frustration and humiliation finally spilled over my eyelashes. "I skipped meals this month to make sure the rent cleared. I worked 20 hours straight last weekend. Look at the notice, it's not just us. The paper says the entire building was bought out by a private conglomerate yesterday, and they are terminating our specific lease immediately. They aren't even giving us the option to renew. I don't care about the conglomerate." Minho snapped, running a hand through his messy hair, completely blind to the tears streaming down my dark cheeks. "All I know is that my studio setup is in there, and I have nowhere to go. If you were actually managing your money properly instead of sending it all back home, we wouldn't be in this mess. You promised me you had this covered." The words felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. "You promised me you had this covered." He didn't care about the toll it was taking on my body. He didn't care that I was drowning. To him, I wasn't a partner. I was a safety net that had just broken. I sank against the hallway wall, pulling my knees to my chest as Minho slammed the apartment door shut to go make angry phone calls to his friends, leaving me outside in the flickering, buzzy light. The raw, heavy ache of betrayal and exhaustion converged on me all at once. I buried my face in my hands, my shoulders shaking as a ragged sob tore from my throat. I had given everything I had. I had stripped myself of dignity, rest, and happiness, just to keep a roof over our heads and to feel like I belonged to someone. But as I sat on the dirty floor of a building that was throwing me out, next to broken eggs and a boyfriend who blamed me for his own failures, the crushing truth settled deep into my soul. I was entirely, completely alone. I was a ghost in this glittering city, drowning in a sea of debts and empty promises, and nobody was coming to save me. The sound of my own weeping echoed hollowly down the dim, narrow corridor, a desperate rhythm that felt entirely fitting for a life that had just collapsed around me. I kept my face buried in my hands, smelling the harsh tang of the chemical cleaner on the linoleum and the faint, broken scent of the crushed eggs. I braced myself for the door to open again, expecting another round of Minho's toxic blame, or perhaps a neighbor coming out to complain about the noise. Then, the heavy security fire door at the end of the hallway clicked open. The sound was sharp, cutting through the ambient buzz of the flickering fluorescent light. I didn't lift my head. I assumed it was the property manager returning to ensure the eviction notice had been properly delivered, or a moving crew coming to scout the apartment. But the footsteps that followed were entirely wrong for a building superintendent. They were slow, heavy, and carried a rhythmic, mathematical precision that made the floorboards beneath me seem to steady themselves. The sharp, clean clack of high-end Italian leather soles against the worn floor echoed with an almost predatory confidence. The linoleum in this building is remarkably cold, a voice broke through the silence, and far too dirty for someone who carries herself with such grace. The voice was a deep, rich baritone, incredibly smooth but vibrating with an underlying authority that commanded instant attention. It was fluent English, delivered with the flawless, crisp cadence of Seoul's ultra-elite class. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly lowered my hands from my face, my vision blurred by hot tears, and blinked up through the damp strands of my natural hair. Standing at the entrance of our small hallway corridor was a man who looked like an eclipse wrapped in fabric. He was breathtakingly handsome, with razor-sharp, aristocratic facial features, a chiseled jawline that looked as though it had been sculpted from marble, and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to look right through the walls of the building. His jet-black hair was styled immaculately away from his forehead. He wore a stunning, perfectly tailored deep navy three-piece suit that practically radiated absolute power and immeasurable wealth. This was Ji-woon. I didn't know his identity yet, but I knew his face from the finance magazines stacked on the desks at the legal firm where I translated documents. He was the legendary, ruthless billionaire tycoon who sat at the absolute pinnacle of the JS Investment Group, a man known in the corporate world as a brilliant, unyielding predator who bought out failing companies and restructured them without a shred of mercy. The media called him the Ice King of Seoul. But as I stared at him from my pathetic position on the floor, he didn't look at me with the cold, calculative gaze of a corporate raider. His intense, dark eyes didn't linger on my stained jacket or the spilled groceries. Instead, his gaze locked directly onto the tear tracks cutting through the makeup on my rich brown skin, reading the profound exhaustion etched into my features. He stepped past the cracked eggs, completely ignoring the mess, and approached the wall where I sat. He didn't tower over me to flex his immense status. Instead, he did something that shattered my expectations. He knelt. Right there on the dirty, neglected floor of a third-rate apartment building, ruining the fabric of a trouser set that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. Ji-woon brought himself down to my exact eye level. Instead of offering a standard token of pity, he reached out and gently placed his warm, heavy suit jacket over my trembling shoulders, draping the expensive navy wool around me like a shield against the hallway's freezing draft. I pulled the jacket tighter around myself, my defenses flaring up as the scent of rich cedarwood and black tea instantly enveloped me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice raw and cracking. "If you're with the new management, I already saw the notice. You don't have to gloat. We'll be out." Ji-woon didn't flinch at my sharp tone. His hand remained perfectly still, holding the silk out to me. A subtle, incredibly gentle shift occurred in his dark eyes, softening the harsh, masculine lines of his face. "I am not here to gloat, Maya," Ji-woon said softly, his deep voice carrying an intimate warmth that felt completely foreign in this freezing hallway. Hearing my name spoken by him sent a strange electric shiver down my spine. And I do not care about the management. I care that the only person working herself to death in this city is currently sitting in the dirt. "How do you know my name?" I stammered, finally reaching out with a trembling hand to take the handkerchief. The silk was warm, carrying a faint, intoxicating scent of rich cedarwood and black tea. I dabbed at my eyes, suddenly feeling incredibly small under his intense, unwavering gaze. "I know many things," Ji-woon replied calmly, standing up in one fluid, powerful motion. He extended a hand down to me, offering to help me up, but he didn't pull or force me. He simply waited, holding his palm open, giving me total control over the moment. "I know that you translate 80 pages of complex legal text a day. I know you spend your nights managing marketing campaigns for a brand that doesn't pay you what you are worth. And I know that everyone else in your life is blind to the weight you are carrying." He glanced at the closed door of apartment 4B, where the faint sound of Minho shouting on his phone could still be heard through the thin wood. For a split second, a look of lethal, absolute disgust crossed Ji-woon's handsome face, a shadow of the ruthless billionaire who crushed empires. But when he looked back down at me, his expression smoothed into something completely protective. "A diamond should not be used to prop up a collapsing roof," Ji-woon murmured, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart stutter. "You have spent 2 years trying to ensure that a coward feels like a king, while he ensures you feel like nothing. His eviction is not a tragedy, Maya. It is a correction." He didn't boast about his billions. He didn't explain why he was standing in a run-down apartment complex in the middle of the night. He didn't try to sweep me into his arms or promise to pay my debts like a cliché savior. In that exact moment, his vast, terrifying power wasn't a weapon he was using to intimidate me. It was a massive shield he was quietly placing between me and the world that had been crushing me. He was the only person in the entire city of Seoul who had looked past the chaos, looked past the eviction notice, and simply noticed my pain. And as I finally placed my hand in his warm, strong palm to let him lift me off the floor, the icy weight in my chest began, just a fraction, to lift. The 48 hours specified on the neon orange eviction notice came and went, but to my absolute bewilderment, the chaotic scramble to pack my life into cardboard boxes never happened. While Minho spent his days frantically pacing the living room, screaming into his phone at various friends and distant relatives to find a couch to crash on, the heavy hand of the law never knocked on our door. The property manager didn't return. The security guards never came back to enforce the deadline. It was as if our apartment had been cast into a strange, untouchable bubble, completely insulated from the rest of the building's sudden corporate overhaul. I knew exactly who was responsible for the quiet storm around us. Ji-woon didn't try to force his way into my daily routine or demand that I change my life to accommodate his presence. Instead, he chose to weave himself into the margins of my exhausting schedule with a quiet, uncanny consistency that completely redefined what it meant to feel safe. He didn't order me to quit my jobs, he understood, with a profound respect that no one else had ever shown me, that my independence was a badge of honor I had fought tooth and nail to earn. Instead, he subtly shifted the gravity of the city to make my path a little less steep. Every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., when I stepped out of the front entrance of the apartment building to make my grueling commute to the legal firm, a sleek, immaculate black town car would be idling quietly by the curb. The driver, an elderly gentleman in a crisp suit, would simply open the door with a respectful bow, shielding me from the biting morning wind. Inside the firm, the suffocating mountain of legal translation work that usually left my eyes bloodshot and my hands cramping began to miraculously thin out. When I asked my supervisor about the sudden drop in my workload, she simply smiled, shuffling her papers. "A major new corporate client, JS Investment Group, has requested your exclusive services, Maya C. They insisted on a massive retainer that covers your full salary, but they explicitly mandated that you are not to be assigned more than 15 pages of translation data per day to ensure optimum quality control. You can go home early today. Ji-woon was buying my time back from the world, giving me the rarest commodity of all, room to breathe. Our connection grew not from lavish dates or public displays of his immense wealth, but from quiet, grounded conversations that we shared in the evenings. Twice a week, the Blacktown car would take me to a small, private traditional tea house tucked away in a quiet alley near Namsan Mountain. Ji-woon would always be waiting, having booked out the entire venue just so we could talk without the prying eyes of the press or his corporate rivals. Sitting across from him on the silk floor cushions, stripped of the armor of his billion-dollar title, I discovered the man beneath the cold Ice King persona. I opened up to him about the raw, aching grief of losing my mother, the heavy pressure of carrying her lingering debts, and how exhausting it was to constantly feel like I had to prove my right to exist as a Black woman in a society that so often treated me like an exotic anomaly or an invisible worker. Ji-woon listened with an intensity that made me feel like my voice was the only sound in the universe. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to solve my problems with a checkbook. He simply validated my struggle. "You have spent so long being the anchor for everyone else, Maya," he murmured one evening, his dark, piercing eyes catching the amber glow of the tea candles as he poured a stream of rich green tea into my cup. "But even the strongest anchors need a harbor. You do not have to prove your worth to me. Your existence is already enough." In return, he shared the suffocating weight of his own world, a world where every smile was a transaction, every handshake was a potential betrayal, and his own family looked at him as a balance sheet rather than a human being. In my position, everyone wants to control me or use my power, Ji-woon said softly, his fingers lightly brushing against the rim of his ceramic cup. "But when I am here with you, looking into your eyes, I am just Ji-woon. You do not want my investments. You do not fear my title. You see me." We shared laughter in those quiet hours, a sweet, unexpected medicine that began to gently heal the jagged wounds of my low self-esteem. I found myself falling deeply in love with the absolute safety he provided, a protection that never felt like control, a kindness that never demanded a return on its investment. One rainy Thursday evening, as we walked down a narrow sidewalk after leaving the tea house, a luxury sedan lost traction on the slick asphalt, its tires screeching violently as it veered toward the curb where I was standing. Before a gasp could even escape my throat, Ji-woon's lightning-fast reflexes kicked in. With a fluid, powerful motion, he stepped directly between me and the street, wrapping a strong arm around my waist and pulling me flush against his broad chest. He completely absorbed the impact of the heavy spray of muddy water, shielding my body entirely with his own back as the car roared past. The street went dead silent, except for the sound of the pouring rain. Ji-woon didn't even look at his ruined, expensive navy suit coat. His grip on my waist tightened, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps as he held me tightly against his racing heart. "Are you hurt? Maya, look at me. Are you bleeding?" he demanded, his voice laced with a raw, fierce panic I had never heard from the unyielding billionaire before. His large hands cupped my face, his dark eyes frantically scanning my skin, searching for any sign of trauma. "I'm fine. I'm completely fine," I breathed, my hands resting against his damp lapels. My heart was pounding erratically, not from the close call with the vehicle, but from the overwhelming sensation of being completely, unconditionally protected. For the first time in my entire life, someone had stood between me and the storm, willing to take the blow meant for me. The space between us felt electric, charged with a sudden, beautiful gravity. The rain dripped from the tips of his styled black hair, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. As I looked up into his eyes, wrapped securely in his arms, the rest of Seoul faded into a blur. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was cherished. I leaned into his touch, my heart whispering a terrifying truth. I was falling for him. But just as the warmth of his lips began to descend toward mine, the sharp, intrusive buzz of a phone vibration broke the silence. Ji-woon's personal assistant stepped out from a nearby shadow, holding a secured tablet with a pale, worried expression. "Chairman," the assistant whispered, casting a nervous glance at me. "We have a crisis. The internal audit of the newly acquired apartment building in Mapo is complete. The boyfriend, Min-ho, he has just signed a contract with our primary corporate rival, Star Entertainment. He didn't just sell his music rights, sir. He sold them the proprietary legal translation data that Maya has been working on at her firm." My blood ran completely cold. The beautiful, safe world Ji-woon had built for me shattered in an instant as a new, terrifying mystery clawed its way to the surface. The rain felt suddenly freezing as it pelted against my skin. The warm, electric bubble Ji-woon had created popping instantly into a cold, harsh vacuum. The assistant's words echoed in my mind, a brutal, disjointed sequence that made my lungs seize. Min-ho. A contract with Star Entertainment. My proprietary legal translation data. I stepped back out of Ji-woon's arms, my hands trembling as the cold wind whipped through my damp hair. The man I had spent 2 years supporting, the man I had skipped meals to feed, hadn't just been lazy, he had been a predator in my own home. I looked up at Ji-woon, his handsome face turning into a mask of absolute lethal stone under the street lamps. The gentle, vulnerable man who had just held me in the rain vanished, replaced by the ruthless billionaire tycoon who crushed empires for breakfast. Ji-woon, my voice shook, a mix of terror and confusion tightening my throat. "What is your assistant talking about? Why did you buy my apartment building? Was this entire month just a game to you? Did you buy a whole piece of real estate just to evict my boyfriend and manipulate me into your arms?" Ji-woon didn't flinch. He stood rigidly under the downpour, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a heavy, unyielding gravity. "I bought the building because it was the fastest way to isolate the parasite destroying your life, Maya. But the eviction wasn't a game. It was a defensive measure. I knew what he was doing long before you did. You knew?" A bitter, broken laugh ripped from my chest, tears of hot humiliation mixing with the cold rain on my face. "You've been tracking me? Investigating my life? You let me walk into my hallway and cry over an eviction notice, letting me think I was losing my home, just so you could play the savior. How is that protection, Ji-woon? That's control. You're no different from the managers at my firm who look at me like an object to be managed." It was never about control. Ji-woon stepped forward, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain like a physical strike, losing his signature cold composure for the very first time. He gripped my upper arms, his hands warm and firm, forcing me to look into the absolute sincerity of his blazing eyes. "If I had walked up to you on the street and told you your boyfriend was a thief, you would have defended him. You would have called me a paranoid corporate monster. I needed to separate him from you legally so my auditors could access the network logs in that building without tipping off Star Entertainment. I didn't want to see you cry, Maya. Every tear you shed on that linoleum floor felt like a blade in my own chest. But I had to let the legal pieces fall into place to save you from federal corporate espionage charges." The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. Federal corporate espionage. My mind spun. The legal documents I had been translating at my firm, they weren't mid-tier files. They were highly classified, proprietary technological patents for JS Investment Group's new cosmetics line. Min-ho hadn't just been sleeping on my couch. He had been copying the files from my laptop while I slept, using my foreign expat credentials as a digital shield to cover his tracks. Before I could process the sheer scale of the betrayal, the sound of car tires screeching echoed from the entrance of the alleyway. A flashy, expensive sports car, one I knew Min-ho could never afford, idled violently near the curb. The passenger door flew open, and Min-ho stepped out. He was dressed in a brand new designer leather jacket, a heavy gold chain gleaming around his neck, but his face was pale, frantic, and sweat dripped down his forehead despite the cold rain. He looked like a man running out of time. When he spotted me standing with Ji-woon, his eyes widened in a mixture of rage and terror. He rushed forward, ignoring the 2 towering security guards who instantly stepped into his path, their hands moving inside their suit jackets. Maya, listen to me," Min-ho shouted, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate edge. Don't look at him. He's the one who ruined us. This billionaire psycho bought our building just to throw me out on the street because he's obsessed with you. He used his corporate power to frame me, Maya. He hacked into my studio computer and planted those files to destroy my reputation before my big label meeting. Minho took a trembling step closer, pointing a shaky finger at Ji-woon. He's using you, Maya. He wants to take your translation firm's data and blame it on an expat girl like you, so his own company looks clean in the press. Come with me right now. Star Entertainment gave me a massive advance. I have a penthouse waiting for us in Gangnam. I can pay off your mother's debts tonight. Just walk away from this monster and come back to the man who actually loved you when you had nothing. My head pounded with a deafening, suffocating ache. I stood in the freezing rain, caught in the crossfire of two powerful forces. I looked at Minho, the man I had carried on my back for 2 years, who was suddenly flash-frying my entire career while wearing a designer jacket paid for by my stolen labor. Then I looked at Ji-woon, the ruthless Ice King who had quietly thinned my workload, bought my time back, and absorbed a physical blow for me in the dark. Every scene, every revelation was answering one question while opening a locker of 100 more. Who was the real criminal in my life? The boyfriend who promised me a penthouse built on my own ruin? Or the billionaire who bought my building just to force the truth into the light? The rain poured down like a heavy satin curtain, slicking the asphalt and casting long, distorted reflections of the three of us beneath the buzzing street lamps. Minho stood a few feet away, his chest heaving under his brand-new leather jacket, looking like a cornered animal trying to bluff its way out of a trap. Beside me, Ji-woon remained completely unmoving, a towering silhouette of absolute corporate authority and lethal stillness. Choose, Maya, Minho pleaded, his voice cracking as he took a step forward, extending a trembling hand toward me. He is a predator. He bought our entire home just to evict me and corner you. He's a billionaire who plays with people's lives like chess pieces. Come with me. I have the money now. We can clear your mother's name, leave this district, and never look back. I looked at Minho's hand. For 2 years, I had desperately waited for him to reach for me, to tell me he was ready to help carry the burden. But looking at him now, seeing the shallow greed in his eyes and the expensive gold chain that felt like a mockery of my sleepless nights, the illusion shattered. I turned my head slowly to look up at Ji-woon. The ruthless billionaire didn't reach out to grab me. He didn't command his security guards to drag Minho away into the shadows. He simply stood there, letting the rain drench his tailored suit, his dark eyes locked onto mine with a profound, aching vulnerability that bypassed all his wealth and power. Is it true, Ji-woon? I whispered, my voice cutting through the steady roar of the downpour. Did you frame him? Did you plant those files just to force me into a corner? Ji-woon let out a slow, heavy breath, the steam rising into the freezing air. He didn't look at Minho. His focus remained entirely, exclusively on me. I have never needed to frame a coward to prove his lack of worth. Maya, I bought your building, yes. But I did it because my security team flagged a major data breach originating from your apartment's IP address 3 weeks ago. Someone was systematically downloading JS Investment Group's core biochemical patents. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Ji-woon reached into his inside jacket pocket. Minho flinched, taking a frantic step back toward his sports car. But Ji-woon didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a sleek, waterproof leather folder containing a stack of decrypted network logs and bank statements. He opened it, using his broad shoulders to shield the pages from the rain, and held them up so I could see them clearly under the street lamp. Look at the digital signatures, Maya, Ji-woon said, his deep baritone steady and calm. My eyes scanned the top document. It was an internal audit from my translation firm, but beneath it was a forensic digital trail. Every single file download had occurred between 2 a.m. and 5 like, and the exact hours I was asleep after pulling double shifts. The secondary device logged into my secure corporate VPN wasn't mine. It was registered to a high-end music production tablet. Minho's tablet. He didn't just steal the data, Maya, Ji-woon revealed, his eyes turning to chips of ice as he finally looked at Minho. Look at the second page. That is a contract signed by Minho and Star Entertainment's subsidiary legal team. Dated 2 weeks before the eviction notice. He negotiated a deal to sell my proprietary formulas, using your foreign expat credentials as the fall guy. If my team hadn't intercepted the final encrypted transmission, the federal authorities would have raided your apartment. You would have faced a 10-year prison sentence and immediate deportation. While he walked away with a multi-million-dollar production contract in Gangnam. The truth hit me like a physical blow, knocking the remaining breath from my lungs. I stumbled back slightly, my hands flying to my mouth as a hot wave of pure horror washed over me. The man I had loved, the man I had sacrificed my health and my youth to support, had looked at my vulnerability, my isolated status in this country, and my love for him, and decided I was the perfect sacrificial lamb for his ambition. But that isn't the only reason I bought the building, Maya, Ji-woon murmured, his voice dropping into a gentle, haunting register that made my heart stutter. He turned the page, revealing an old international wire transfer receipt from 3 years ago. My eyes widened as I recognized my mother's name on the document, alongside the logo of the Atlanta hospital where she had spent her final days. The massive outstanding medical bill, the one that had haunted my nightmares and driven me to work 80 hours a week, had a bold digital stamp across it, paid in full. The originating corporate entity was JS Investment Group. You, I stammered, my chest heaving as tears finally spilled over my eyelashes. You paid off my mother's hospital debt? Years ago? How? Your mother was the head chef at the small traditional estate my grandfather owned in Georgia when I was sent abroad to study, Ji-woon said softly, taking a step closer until his warmth shielded me from the wind. When I was a bitter, lonely teenager hated by my own family, she was the only person who cooked for me with real kindness. She used to show me pictures of her fierce, brilliant daughter back home, telling me how proud she was of your independent spirit. Before she passed, she called me. She didn't ask for money for herself. She asked me to make sure the world didn't crush you if you ever came to Seoul. She asked me to be a harbor for you. The revelation shattered my reality. The ruthless billionaire I thought had suddenly dropped into my life out of nowhere wasn't a predator manipulating my trajectory. He was the silent, faithful guardian who had been honoring a promise made to my mother long before I ever set foot in this country. He had let me keep my independent jobs because he respected my pride. But the moment a real monster crawled into my life to destroy me, he had moved an entire mountain of real estate just to rip my blindfold off. I gave him a choice when I bought the building, Ji-woon said, his voice dropping into a lethal, freezing whisper as he stared at Minho. I gave him an eviction notice to see if he would confess to you, clear your name, and ask for help. Instead, he panicked, ran straight to Star Entertainment, and accelerated the sale of your stolen data to secure his own paycheck. The person you thought was destroying your home, Maya, was simply tearing down the walls of your prison. The roar of the rain against the pavement was the only sound left in the alleyway, a heavy, deafening weight that matched the absolute destruction of my old reality. The leather folder in Ji-woon's hand closed with a sharp, definitive snap. But the truth it contained was already carved into the air between us. I stood completely frozen, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps as the cold downpour soaked through my clothes. But inside, a fierce, blazing fire was consuming every insecurity, every doubt, and every ounce of low self-esteem I had carried for the last 2 years. I looked at the two men standing in front of me, the two opposing forces who had quietly holding the strings of my life. On one side was Minho. He had backed up completely against the hood of his flashy, unearned sports car, his chest heaving under his designer leather jacket. The frantic, desperate lover routine had completely dissolved, leaving behind nothing but the pathetic, trembling shell of a thief who had gambled my freedom for a paycheck and lost. He couldn't even look me in the eye. His gaze darted wildly toward the alley exit, where Ji-woon's security team stood like immovable statues of granite. On the other side was Ji-woon. The ruthless Ice King of Seoul's corporate underworld stood completely exposed to the elements, his immaculate navy suit drenched, his styled black hair dripping with rain. He didn't use his billions to threaten me. He didn't order his men to force me into his car. He stood perfectly still, giving me the one thing this city, my job, and my ex-fiancé had always denied me: absolute, unconditional autonomy. Maya, Minho stammered, his voice cracking as he tried to clutch at the remnants of his lies. Maya, you can't trust a man like him. He's a billionaire tycoon. He manipulates data for a living. Even if the tablet logs are real, Star Entertainment set me up. They pressured me. I did it for us, Maya. I wanted to give you a penthouse in Gangnam so you could stop working yourself to death. Think about the 2 years we shared. You can't just throw that away for a stranger who bought our apartment. I looked at Minho, and for the first time in 2 years, the veil was completely gone. I didn't see a misunderstood, struggling artist who just needed my support. I saw a predator who had looked at a beautiful black woman, isolated and exhausted in a foreign country, and decided I was the perfect shield to hide his crimes behind. He didn't love me when I had nothing. He loved that I had enough resilience for the both of us. A resilience he could drain until there was nothing left but a prison sentence. I turned away from him, my boots splashing in the puddles as I stepped closer to Ji-woon. I looked up into his dark, piercing eyes, searching the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. You kept this from me, I said, my voice steady and clear, despite the tightness in my chest. You let me walk into that hallway and break down over an eviction notice. You watched me cry, Ji-woon, knowing exactly what he was doing behind my back. I am sorry for the theater, Maya, Ji-woon replied, his deep baritone laced with a raw, agonizing sincerity that tore through his billionaire armor. He didn't flinch away from my anger. If I had simply handed you a file 3 weeks ago, you would have called me a ruthless corporate hunter trying to destroy your relationship. You would have defended him, and he would have accelerated his timeline, burying the digital evidence deeper. I needed him to panic. I needed him to make a legal move that my forensic auditors could trace definitively to Star Entertainment, clearing your name completely from the federal grid. But watching you cry on that linoleum floor, it was the hardest thing I have ever had to endure. If you choose to walk away from me right now and never look back, I will accept your choice. Your mother's debt is gone. Your legal record is immaculate. You are completely free. The strongest, most enduring romances are never built on simple physical attraction or the thrill of a billionaire's rescue. They are built on choices. The question hammering against my ribs wasn't whether I was drawn to Ji-woon's immense power or his breathtaking looks. The question was whether I had the courage to choose trust over familiarity. Will I choose to stay in the comfortable, suffocating cycle of a lie? Or will I choose the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of being seen by a man who values my soul more than his own comfort? I took a deep, shuddering breath, letting the freezing rain wash away the last remnants of the girl who thought she had to minimize her own existence just to keep a roof over her head. I turned my back completely on Minho. You can keep the designer jacket, Minho, I said, my voice echoing off the brick walls with a fierce, unbreakable authority. And you can keep the sports car. Consider them the final payments for the 2 years of my life you stole. But if you ever speak my name to the press, if you ever come near my firm, or if you ever look in my direction again, you won't be dealing with a tired expat girl. You'll be dealing with JS Investment Group's legal team. Now get out of my sight. Minho's face went entirely bloodless. He looked at me, then at the towering figure of Ji-woon, realizing that his power over my mind had vanished forever. Without another word, he scrambled back into his sports car, slammed the door, and sped out of the alleyway, his tires throwing up a desperate spray of water as he disappeared into the Seoul night. The alley fell quiet again, save for the rhythmic patter of the storm. I turned back to Ji-woon, stepping into the warmth of his immediate space until there were only inches between us. I reached up, my rich brown fingers resting against the damp, heavy fabric of his charcoal lapels, looking directly into the dark eyes of the man who had spent years honoring a promise to my mother. You bought an entire apartment building just to force a coward to show his hand. I whispered, a small, breathless smile finally breaking through my tears. What are you willing to do to keep the woman who finally knows her own worth? A slow, breathtaking warmth broke across Ji-woon's handsome face, the legendary Ice King melting completely under the intensity of my gaze. He reached up, his large, strong hand cupping the side of my face, his thumb gently brushing a stray raindrop from my cheek with infinite tenderness. "I would buy the entire city, Maya," he murmured, his deep voice a solemn, unwavering vow against the rain. "And it would still be a cheap price to pay for the privilege of standing by your side." In that drenched, hidden alleyway, I made my choice. I didn't choose him because he was a ruthless billionaire who could solve my financial problems. I chose him because, in a world that had spent a lifetime telling me I had to work myself to the bone just to be tolerated, he was the only man who looked at my strength, looked at my heart, and decided it was a treasure worth protecting. I leaned into his touch, choosing courage, choosing trust, and finally, choosing a love that didn't demand I earn my value.